Hello, welcome to part 3 of The Magic Finger. Yesterday we finished the story at a place where 4 wild ducks were flying around Mr. Greg and they made him feel quite afraid. He didn't like what was going on. So let's find out what's going to happen today. Take my bookmark off. Here we go. Goodness me, Mr. Greg looks like he's lying in a huge bed. He looks tiny against that pillow, doesn't he? Okay, so remember Mr. Greg has just come into the house. So they went to bed and to sleep. When morning came, Mr. Greg was the first to wake up. He opened his eyes. He was about to put out a hand for his watch to see the time, but his hand wouldn't come out. "That's funny," he said. "Where is my hand?" He lay still, wondering what was up. Maybe he had hurt that hand in some way. He tried the other hand. That wouldn't come out either. He sat up. Then, for the first time, he saw what he looked like. He gave a yell and jumped out of bed. Mrs. Greg woke up, and when she saw Mr. Greg standing there on the floor, she gave a yell too. For he was now a tiny little man. That explains why the pillow's so big, doesn't it? He's gone tiny. He was maybe as tall as the seat of a chair, but no taller. Wow, that is really small, isn't it? If you think about how high a chair is off the ground, just the bit you sit on, that's really small. And where his arms had been, he had a pair of duck's wings instead. Oh my goodness. Look. No wonder he couldn't get his hand out. He doesn't have any hands. And look, can you see? He must have put his clothes over a chair and his head isn't even as high as the seat of the chair where the clothes are. Do you see tiny Mrs. Greg peering over the edge of the bed at him? Goodness me. I wonder what has happened to Mr. Greg's hands. I wonder why he's got a pair of duck's wings instead. What do you think? Missed a page there. Here we go. But, cried Mrs. Greg, going purple in the face. "My dear man, what's happened to you?" "What's happened to both of us, you mean?" shouted Mr. Greg. It was Mrs. Greg's turn now to jump out of bed. She ran to look at herself in the glass, but she was not tall enough to see into it. She was even smaller than Mr. Greg, and she too had got wings instead of arms. "Oh, oh, oh, oh," sobbed Mrs. Greg. Oh, look, she really is nowhere near even being able to look in the mirror, is she? Goodness me, she's super tiny. But look, she's got duck wings too. Oh, they're not the only ones, look. Their boys have got duck wings too, Philip and William, but look at the difference in their faces. There's Mrs. Greg. There's Philip and William. What do you think Philip and William think of this? It looks to me, with those great big smiles on their faces, that they're really quite enjoying this, being able to fly around. I can see that they're right up by the ceiling. "This is witch's work," cried Mr. Greg, and both of them started running around the room, flapping their wings. A minute later, Philip and William burst in. The same thing had happened to them. They had wings and no arms, and they were really tiny. They were about as big as robins. "Mama, Mama, Mama," chirruped Philip. "Look, Mama, we can fly!" And they flew up into the air. "Come down at once," said Mrs. Greg. "You're much too high." But before she could say another word, Philip and William had flown right out the window. Ooh, what do you think they've gone off to do? Oh, look, now Mr. and Mrs. Greg are flying as well. Mr. and Mrs. Greg ran to the window and looked out. The 2 tiny boys were now high up in the sky. Then Mrs. Greg said to Mr. Greg, "Do you think we could do that, my dear? Look, do you see how the word we is in slanty writing? In italics, that means when you read it, you have to really emphasise that word. Do you think we could do that, my dear? I don't see why not, Mr. Gregg said. Come on, let's try. Mr. Gregg began to flap his wings hard, and all at once, up he went. Then Mrs. Gregg did the same. Help! She cried as she started going up. Save me! Come on, said Mr. Gregg. Don't be afraid. Look, there's the boys flying far away. So out the window they flew, far up into the sky, and it did not take them long to catch up with Philip and William. Soon the whole family was flying around and around together. Oh, isn't it lovely? Cried William. I've always wanted to know what it feels like to be a bird. Your wings are not getting tired, are they, dear? Mr. Gregg asked Mrs. Gregg. Not at all, Mrs. Gregg said. I could go on forever. Hey, look down there, said Philip. Somebody is walking in our garden. I'm going to stop there for today. Who do you think could be walking in their garden? Who might it be? Who else have we met so far in this story? We've met Mr. Gregg, Mrs. Gregg, William and Philip. I think we've only met one other person in this story. My second question for you today is, would you like to be able to fly? And I would love to know if you would or if you wouldn't like to fly. Why is that? Why would you like to fly if you could? Or why would you choose not to fly if you could? Okay, that's all for today. I'll talk to you again tomorrow. Bye-bye for now.